Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Hope Warrior Project podcast. Today, we welcome our guest, Tina Beauvais, and she is, like many of us, someone who wears many titles in life. So she is a wife. She's been married to her best friend and husband for 11 years. She's a mom of a blended family. Between the two of them, they have 5 children. And she's also a special needs mom. Her daughter, Noel, was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. In addition to all that, she's also a business owner and a varsity basketball coach. So this girl's got a lot going on. But at Tina's core, she knows that the one title amongst all of them that really grounds her and describes her true identity is one of being daughter of the King. And that title is what has carried her through many challenges of life. So we're excited to have Tina with us today because she's going to share some of her story with us, particularly as it relates to being the mom of a child with special needs. So I think certainly no parent would expect to be given that news, right? In fact, I think a lot of parents, when they're expecting, they fear that they may get that news. So like anyone, when Tina received that news, I'm sure a multitude of emotions and feelings and questions arose for her. But over the last 14 years since she's had Noel, she has found such a unique joy in this life so that she can share this with us today. And she loves sharing her life with others to inspire and encourage others to have hope in the challenges of life. So Tina, thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be able to share and talk with you ladies. I'm just really happy to be here. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tina, thank you so much for being with us. And just so, not all of our listeners or community is going to be able to relate to this because, it's pretty rare, but kind of paint a picture for us of so you were 22 when you had Noel, pretty young, and she was your first, right?
Yes.
So, oh man, being a mom, I know that there's already so much uncertainty that goes along with just being a first-time mom and being young. So, I guess talk a little bit about that experience of finding out the diagnosis and what that felt like, and then maybe a little bit more of what those early years looked like.
Yeah, so like you said, I was 22 when I had Noel, so I kind of say I was a baby myself. I hadn't planned on having her. I was actually running college track at the time, and unfortunately I was in a really bad relationship, and I was trying to get out of that when I found out I was pregnant. So it kind of just, from the beginning wasn't an ideal situation. Her being my first, I had really no reference to what pregnancy was like. And from everything I knew, it was normal. There's definitely different ways that, parents find out about their child who has special needs or disability. And mine wasn't before I had her. And I'm kind of thankful in that because I feel like naive almost, like I didn't know what was coming. But as soon as she was born, it was apparent there was something wrong. She didn't cry. There wasn't, she wasn't making noise like she should have. And so those, initial emotions were fear and worry and stress. Like it just wasn't the picture that I had expected my whole life, right? I think we all have this expectation of what it's going to be, and nothing was according to my expectation. So in those first few months, I was just lonely and isolated. I felt like I didn't know what was happening, and neither did anybody else. Thankfully, I found this amazing poem from one of her nurses called Welcome to Holland. And it kind of paints this beautiful picture of when you're going to have a baby, you're planning this trip to Italy. And then the plane lands and the stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." And you're like, what do you mean Holland? And that's kind of, I think, how a lot of us enter this journey of being a special needs parent is all of a sudden we're in Holland. But when I got that poem, I finally for once didn't feel alone, because I was like, well, somebody else wrote this, so somebody else must have had these experiences and been going through it. And underneath all of that, I just feel like God gave me this strength and almost this choice. I feel like he gave me this opportunity to choose to be strong in it, even though I was clueless. And I honestly feel like in those early, well, not even the early years, I feel like my family has always looked at me to almost be the leader. And they looked at me to be like, all right, how are you going to figure this out? And thankfully, God equipped me, I think, to make that choice. And so even though I was scared and overwhelmed, and I mean, I even like think of walking through the halls of the hospital, I was just in another world. There was still this steady, constant strength that God gave me that I got to pick. And I think that's really kind of where my story began with her, was just choosing to pick that strength. So yeah, and I, being an athlete, I was expecting to have an athlete. Like I was expecting for my daughter just to run track or play sports or do the things that I had done. And so Noelle had a lot of medical complications in the beginning. So actually what led to her early diagnosis was the fact that she needed a G-tube, which is a feeding tube put in her stomach because she wasn't able to eat on her own. So the only reason we got a diagnosis at 5 months was because of that. And they went in at the same time and they did a muscle biopsy. So they took a tiny piece of her muscle and they were able to come back with her diagnosis. So sitting in that meeting, her dad wasn't there. I was with a friend. I had already had, I think, 5 months of mourning and realizing that things weren't going to be quote unquote normal. Even though I was hoping, like, hopefully it was just a rough delivery. Hopefully everything's okay. It's almost like I knew. God had given me this knowing, and honestly, anything in Noelle's life, if she needed a procedure or needed this or that, it's like God gave me this season of mourning beforehand and preparation, so that then when I actually heard the news, I was kind of prepared for it. So that day when I got Noelle's diagnosis, which is, like you said, muscular dystrophy, I had already had some time to process that. And not that I had any idea what her life was going to look like. I think the one thing I came to terms with was, okay, sports are going to look different for her. And so when I did get that initial diagnosis, my first response was, well, she could still be in the Special Olympics. Because it was like, okay, I know that her life isn't going to be what I thought, but let's make the most of what it may be. And like I said, it was still so naive because I really had no idea ultimately what all that was going to lead to. But that was kind of the initial moments of her diagnosis.
Yeah, and so just from talking with you a few weeks ago or whenever that was, I have no sense of time. COVID, it takes time away. Whenever we talked, not that long ago, and then again today, like I can just see like your positivity shine through with such a, like, it can be, obviously a challenge. And I love just the way that you're able to like look back and see God in all of it. Like you're like, God gave me those 5 months to prepare my heart, like I just feel like that's a beautiful, beautiful trait that like you can look back and see how he's working in your life in like these subtle ways that maybe other people wouldn't pick up on. And like other people might say like, well, I wish I would have known when I was pregnant, because it would have made things differently. And, we try to rewrite the past. But so I think that's so amazing. And just that you're able to see the blessings and the positive and everything. But, obviously it was a challenge, it still is a challenge. And so I just want to ask you, I guess, were there times where that positivity failed you at all? Or were there times where it wasn't quite there, or like where you really struggled? Like what was like maybe the most challenging part of all of it, and how did that feel?
Yes, there was absolutely moments when my positivity failed me, or it just wasn't there. And I say too, I think part of I'm optimistic by nature. That's just how God's created me. But I think that part of it too is just naive. I was so naive. I didn't know what was gonna happen. And so it was almost like this, like, we'll get through it kind of thing. And so her first year of life, there was like mostly feeding struggles. And then I went to go stay with my parents. She was about a year. She had already had her first birthday. And I could tell that she needed oxygen. It was something she had struggled with her whole first year of life. So I took her down to Children's Hospital, assuming gotta go in, get her some oxygen, and then we'll head home. And I packed an overnight bag, and I remember my mom telling me like, why are you packing a bag? And I'm like, oh mom, I know, like, you just never know when you have a kiddo like Noel, but I'm pretty sure I'll be there at least overnight. So I need some extra things. Well, little did I know that I left my parents' house. That was January, in my house, basically. I didn't return home until October of that year. So again, it was that naiveness. Like, I didn't know what I was about to face, but I was just like, all right, we're going to do this. And so during that hospital admission, Noel actually had RSV, which is very similar to COVID, actually. I mean, it produces a lot of secretions and difficulty breathing and all these things. And so Noelle went from kind of doing okay to really tanking, and she started doing terrible, to the point where she had to be transferred to ICU. She had to be intubated, so she had a breathing tube put down her throat, which is a terrible thing to have to witness your child have to do. And she actually didn't have to be sedated. Usually a child has to be completely sedated if they have a breathing tube, but Noelle had never breathed on her own very well before. So having the help of the ventilator, like, she didn't try to pull it out because she knew like it was helping her. So we spent 6 weeks in ICU, and I think that was probably one of the lowest points in my life up to this point, because here I was sitting there with Noelle day in and day out, watching her fight, watching her struggle to breathe. It was, you're almost in this like fishbowl too. In an ICU room, there's windows, there's nurses in and out, there's doctors, you have no privacy. I had to use the bathroom at the front of the unit. Like, so there was no privacy at all. And the only time that you get a break and time away from your child is when you're in the shower. And in the shower, you're even, we talk about mom guilt, but there's this whole nother level of mom guilt when you have a child in the hospital. You're like, you feel guilty to just be taking a shower. But at the same time, I was seeing so many hurting kids around her. I was seeing so many kids that were so sick and who had gone through horrific things. There was some children who, in a very tragic event, ended up being burned, and they were in the room next to Noelle. And I'm sitting there like, what is happening? This is so sad. And, I had been there for 6 weeks. I hadn't left. I hadn't gone. I mean, I barely walked outside. And so, I was almost in this place of like, God, where are you? Like, how are you letting this happen? This is so sad. This is just, so it was a very desolate, lonely, sad time. And in the midst of that, Noelle's health continued to deteriorate. They ended up, we tried several different times being able to take the breathing tube out, and it failed every time. So she ended up, I had to come to terms with the fact that she would have to get a trach. That's obviously a huge, a hard decision to make. Thankfully I had support.
Real quick, just in case someone doesn't know, trach is where it's attached permanently, right?
Yes, thank you. So the trach actually goes into your throat, into your trachea, and it's a little white tube. And actually my aunt, she used to be a child life specialist, and she used to show me pictures of kids in the hospital. And a lot of those kids had trachs. And the way I associated with, there was always something blue on it. Like, I don't know why, but there was always something blue. And so when I did hear the word trach, I had some reference to it. But yeah, there's usually some kind of attachment, and most times it's blue. But yeah, so that she needed the trach so that she could be on the ventilator permanently, like full time. And that was something where it was hard for me to make that decision, because it was already so hard to care for her. Like, she was already so hard to pick up. She was very weak and limp, and I'm like, and now I have to pick up her and a ventilator and all these things. And so it was a very, very hard decision to make. And like I said, in the middle of it though, I was just questioning God, like, where are you? Like, why are you letting, if you're a good God, like, why are you letting these children suffer? And why, these families, and just, it was just so much hurt. And I don't even know how I got this book. I don't even know who gave it to me, but somebody gave me, the book by Dale Evans Rogers, which is Roy Rogers' wife. And she wrote the book about her daughter who was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And she was diagnosed back in like the 50s, when you would usually institutionalize a child. Like you wouldn't keep them at home, but they decided to keep their child at home. They're like, no, God blessed us with this child and we're going to figure it out. But that their daughter, actually, she did pass away when she was 2. And so this book is written on the premise of that little girl sitting in heaven, looking down on her situation when she was alive and the mission that God had her on and what she was doing down there. And reading that book started to give all of this hard stuff a purpose. It started to let me see that even in the worst of the worst, like God can have a plan and God can show up and God can be there. And that's really what started to help me kind of shift my focus and shift my thinking, that even in, even in the crap, like even in the hardest parts, he could be in it. And not only is he in it, but he has a plan through it. And that started to really, kind of change where my perspective was at that time.
That is amazing, an amazing shift. So I have experience being in the hospital with children, seeing them like, in those conditions. And my cousin had liver transplant when she was a baby. And so in the hospital, in and out of the hospital, in there for a long time. And so when we would go visit her, seeing all the children, same question, like, you don't understand. Like, these are just poor little innocent kids, why is this happening? So the fact that you could get from that question to this, looking at it from like the purpose of the life that the child had. And I mean, the impact that these children have on so many people, and the perspective that it brings. I mean, that is just monumental, I think, absolutely monumental. So, God blessed you with that book, obviously, to have that.
Yeah. I think that's when it changed my thinking from why me, God, why her, why us, to, okay, God, what purpose do you have? What purpose is there in this? And what purpose is there, instead of that just like, why, and that's really when that shift happened, was that the blessing of that book. And like I said, I don't even remember who gave it to me.
Maybe it was an angel.
I know, probably an angel.
I don't know, but obviously what you needed. So you obviously, that totally shifted how you were thinking about things. How did that, like when you were sitting still and you were still in the hospital after reading this book, right? So how did, like from the before the book to the after the book, how did it shift for like how you were just behaving or feeling? And
well, number one, so I had a care page for Noel, which that was like kind of a Facebook at the time of like updating people. And really, it was just updates. I was just giving updates, like, her blood pressure raised to this and she needs, whatever. They were just very much updates. And then after that shift, I started writing a blog. Like I started blogging about my emotions and my feelings and what God was actually doing. And so that alone, it changed my perspective from needing to give people information to being able to share the story with people and share the hard things with people and share, what it was like, the good days, the bad days. And really that's a huge way that God started to change my perspective. But what's interesting is how I write. It's like, I will go through it, and in those emotions and those moments, I have this like script playing almost, but it's not until that thing was over and then I was able to go back and write about it. So I've never really written, I write it in the raw moments, but then I go back and I like re-edit it after the fact. So kind of like what you said in the beginning, I can see it full circle. Yeah. And that's kind of how I try to, talk about things. And I'm in the middle of writing a book right now, but same thing. It's like, I don't want to just give people the hard part. I want to give them kind of like a little bow wrapped up. Like, it was hard, and then this happened, and so that's really when God started to give me the gift of being able to write to others. And through that, I started making connection with other people and realizing that through my story, I could, even if it is not the same, but I could be, inspiring my brother to get through the situation he's going through, or, a friend. And so that's really when it, like I said, it changed from that why me to what can this purpose be and how can it serve Noel and serve others. And that was when it started stirring. I started knowing that Noel's life was going to be big, like that God was going to do big things. And so it was kind of that anticipation, like, okay, like I know big things are coming.
Yeah.
And so I started to anticipate things a little bit more.
That's amazing. Yeah, I remember when we were talking originally, you shared a story that of just an amazing experience that happened within a matter of like minutes that I want you to share with our audience, because I just felt like it was something that stood out to me, and I will probably always remember this. So, and again, it's showing God working in the situation. So would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, so this was when Noel was about 7 years old, and she was kind of in the most, I guess, so we had just gone on her Make-A-Wish trip. She was not doing well health-wise. Her scoliosis had gotten so bad, and scoliosis is when your spine is curved. It had gotten so bad that her internal organs were getting squished and smashed. And so she was, it was just a struggle to do anything, to get anywhere. I actually was reflecting on this, and the song Worn by 10th Avenue North, I'm worn, my heart is heavy. Like that was basically my anthem in that season of life when I would just be driving places. I would just be like, God, I'm just worn. Like this is hard. This is heavy. And on top of that, going from those emotions, then she went into major surgery to get, she actually got rods in her spine. So they straightened out her spine. And that was a major surgery. I mean, they were right by her spinal cord, all these things. But I think I was expecting like, okay, it's so hard. We're going to get through this surgery and then things are going to be easy. So like the surgery was the big thing and I was ready for the easy. Well, things didn't get easy after her surgery. I was pregnant with with Macy, my 7-year-old, and I had decided to take Noel to church by myself because my husband was at a retreat. So I took Noel, and we didn't have a wheelchair accessible van yet, but still in my mind, everything was going to be easier because she had the surgery. So I took her to church, and she ended up not lasting very long. So I had to leave with her. And basically that meant I loaded and unloaded her into the van 6 times. And not just her, but a child. She actually had casts on both of her feet because she had other procedures done at the same time. She has a ventilator. So she had a trach with tubes and a ventilator, a feeding tube, like all of this stuff. And at the time we didn't have a wheelchair van. So I had to take her, I'm sure moms can relate. It's that transfer from the stroller back to the car seat, right? Except for she was like 7 and had all the things, but it was just that daunting transfer back and forth. Whereas how much easier would it be if you just rolled that stroller in and strapped it down, right? So I had transferred her, and I was worn, like I was tired and I was hormonal and all these things. And I was just mad at God because I was like, dang it, God, it was supposed to get easier. And it's not easier right now. So I called my husband, who, like I said, was at this retreat. And before this, we had talked, because a wheelchair accessible van is $40,000 to $50,000. And so we were looking at like $15,000 down, $800 to $900 a month. And we just couldn't afford it. But we were like, we could do a pancake breakfast, or we'll do a fundraiser. We'll do whatever we can. So I called him, and he was about to go into worship at the retreat. And, poor him, like he was just hanging out with his friends about to do worship, and his, 6-month hormonal wife calls him like, you need to do something. And he's like, okay, I don't know what to do. But that's what I left him with, is like, you need to do something. So I get home and I get a phone call from him, and he is like crying and emotional. And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, Tina, when I was in worship, I just felt like God told me to tell our pastor. And he's like, and I fought it, and I kept being like, no, God, I take care of my family. I don't need to tell anybody. I'm not going to do it. And he's like, but that feeling wouldn't go away. So finally, I just went up to him and I was like, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but this is our need. This is what our family needs. And the pastor told him like, okay, go have so-and-so pray for you. So he did, and they get done with worship. He's ready to start the service. And the pastor said, you know what? I feel like we could change history tonight in this room. he's like, Dustin, I want you to come down here and tell us your need. And Dustin's like, what? He's like, okay. So he goes and he tells him the need. And the pastor said, you know what? There's 800 men in this room. I feel like we could meet this need in 5 minutes. I want you to pray and give whatever the Holy Spirit tells you to give. And I just want to I want to bless this family. And so I'm told that it was like a sporting event then, and people were just like coming down the aisles and throwing money in the buckets. I feel like it was like on It's a Wonderful Life at the end when, they're throwing all the money around. And Dustin was on the stage and he was just weeping, and his friends came around him. And it was just this amazing, God event. And the coolest part about it is that later on, our pastor preached 3 messages on this whole situation. But one of the messages, he said that when Dustin came up to him, he was like, his first reaction was, yeah, a lot of people have needs in the church. Yeah, I hear it all the time. And he basically dismissed him. And he's like, have so-and-so go pray for you. And after he did that, God came and put it on the pastor's heart. No, I want to do something. And I think that's so cool. That's such a part of the story, because it wasn't just our pastor who was like, oh, I'm going to, it was such a God thing that even he almost missed it. He almost missed the opportunity for God to come in and work. And so Dustin gives me a call. And I wasn't at this experience. I wasn't on the mountaintop. I was literally sitting at home, still mad at God, still frustrated. And he calls me and he said, Tina, they took up a supernatural offering and they want to tell us how much it is. And I literally was like, what are you talking about? Because it was just, God, are you kidding me? And so we ended up, he ended up calling us later on. And it was funny. I was with Noel and I was like, I got to put the camera on her, because I wasn't this emotional mess. Nothing was happening in my world. And I told her, I was like, before we got on it, she was like, I hope we get the van. And so then they told us, they're like, yeah, we raised $50,000 in 5 minutes. And I was just dumbfounded. And I'm like, Noel, did you hear that? She's like, I know. And I was like, what? And but yeah, so that was Saturday night. And we got to go on Friday and pick up our van, check in hand, walk in, pick up a van and leave with it. And literally it was life-changing. It changed our lives. The next day was Mother's Day. And before that, we'd go one place and that's it, because it was so much work to load and unload Noel. And that day we went to 5 places. And the last place we went was to get ice cream. And our kids didn't even know you could leave the car for ice cream. They had only ever had drive-through. And, but yeah, so it was so life-changing. But the craziest part was, it wasn't until I think a year later, when again, I was reflecting on it and doing a blog post, I realized that not only had our history changed as far as a van, but 800 men had prayed for Noel. And since that day, Noel hasn't been back to the hospital. And literally, she was in and out of the hospital every month, her first 7 years of life. And she's 14 now. And she has not been back to the hospital since then. And so it was yes, the van was amazing and $50,000, all of that. But what was more amazing was God literally changed the history of Noel's life on that night. So
yes. Oh, that is just, life-changing, obviously, for you, perspective changing for me. Amazing. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I got goosebumps. I don't know how many times I've lost track of how many times I've got goosebumps during this interview.
I love hearing you tell that story, even though I've already heard it, just your passion and Stephanie said, goosebumps. And then also, I think the first time we heard it, you didn't talk about how he was sent to pray. Because I always think about that, for pastors and stuff, the pressure. Oh my gosh, everybody, right? Like you said, everybody has needs. And I'm sure they hear it all day, every day. Can you pray for this? Can you pray for that? Can you pray for this? And how do you manage it, right? And so it's so cool. I just think it's so cool that he was called to do something in that moment, or not in that moment, but after they prayed. Just shows the power of that. So that's so cool. And like you said, Noel hasn't been in the hospital for 7 years. So I know that's been a drastic change since then in your life. But what else is going on? What are you doing with this experience now? What's life looking like now?
Yeah, so since she has a little, it's really given me the opportunity to become an advocate and to start advocating and to just like be able to process life outside of the walls of the hospital. And that's been, a whole nother a lifetime. I do feel like it's been a lifetime since. Now, there's part of me that's always like, okay, I know it's in the back of my head that it could happen again and we could be there. And even in that, I know that God's grace will be there. That's a huge part of the challenges I've gone through, is knowing that God's grace will be there and not trying to worry and fear the unknown, because guess what? His grace isn't there yet, but if and when the situation happens, it will be. And so it's like, I move forward with things with that, kind of in the back of my mind, but not with fear or worry, knowing that if we end up in the hospital next week, God's grace will meet us there and we'll get through by his grace alone. But because I've had this extra time, I have started to be able to focus on advocacy. I've really found this passion, and it's been on my heart to start teaching families and teachers and students how they can be disability inclusive. Because I think, disability inclusion is a word that we throw around, and, it's something good and we all want to do it, but I don't think we're taught how to do it. And so that's really where I've started to fill that space of like teaching how, like, here's how you can be friends. Here's how you can interact. Here's how you can teach your kiddos how to be, kind to others and how to include others. And, simply with that, the biggest thing I teach in that is, I know I was taught, shh, don't stare. And I think that's what I, started to teach my own children. And I think that, the biggest problem in that is that we teach that there's, that we should be afraid, or maybe we should pity people who are different and have disabilities. And I think those are the two things that come, that put that wall between us, is fear and pity. And so what I like to teach parents is, don't teach your kids not to stare. Teach them to make eye contact and say hi. Teach them to engage. And, I always reference too that, especially with younger kids, you're going to want to have discussions and read books and kind of like, front load before you meet a person at the grocery store, who has a wheelchair or whatever, so that you have some reference to it. But even if you don't, there's lots of disabilities. You can't pinpoint all of them. But when you're there and when you meet somebody, just teaching your kids to interact and to engage, and, at least make eye contact and smile. But I think teaching kids to not stare and pretend somebody's not there is just kind of perpetuating that fear and pity issue that's not going to help anybody, with true connection. And so that's something that, it's funny, I started it, a year ago, and my vision and thought was, I'm going to be in schools and presenting and teaching, and then obviously everything changed in March. And so, being in schools, and even before, I was like, oh, schools are going to love this. It's so important. And it's harder to get into, the classrooms than I originally had expected. But so through quarantine, I really have shifted to be able to teach these things, over social media, and just kind of like in a real life way, like the day-to-day, this is our lives and this is what we do. And this is what, what it looks like. And the funniest part of it is that TikTok actually became a very great resource for us, which in the beginning I was using it as a business strategy, but it really blew up over quarantine. And the reason it did was because Noel could be seen and she could be heard, and people could ask her questions without that fear or without maybe the judgment of what other people would think of their question. And so it was this amazing opportunity to just start the conversation. And again, talking about the, how big Noel's life is, I just think how many people have heard us or listened to us or seen her TikToks now go out and about, and if they see somebody else, they have a reference point, and they're like, oh, well, they're like Noel, or, it took away some of that fear, and they're not afraid of Noel now, so maybe they wouldn't be afraid of somebody else. When TikTok was before the whole ban or whatever, we almost had 1 million followers. And so I'm like, her life has literally impacted 1 million people who have heard her or seen her or whatever. And so that has just been, so exciting to be able to have that kind of an impact with just letting people ask questions and just starting to teach about how do we do this. It's been, it's been bigger than I could have expected, for sure.
Right. It's amazing. And I will say, I haven't seen your TikToks, I don't think, but I do follow you on Facebook and Instagram, and just seeing the pictures and when you're out and about and the interactions, I mean, it has given me a completely different perspective, So I think it is really, really impactful. And obviously TikTok has gotten the message out there as well. So I think it's great that you're doing it. I think it's important that people are more aware. And like you said, that parents are able to teach their children, like, you don't have to be scared, right? Because I was taught too, you don't look. So this is a completely shift in that whole approach, and I love it. So if for everybody listening, I know you'll share your pages in a minute. I would definitely go check it out, follow you, because it shifts how you look at special needs completely.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, this kind of just came to my mind right now, but just on this topic, I know right now things are a little bit different with the COVID stuff, but a few years ago, I saw a musical at Willow Creek Church in Barrington. And every year they would do a special needs musical. So the kids would do, and so my mind related it to that, because I love how you're putting her on this platform and you're saying, look at what she can do. Look at this beautiful like soul and this light, because that's like what the musical was. It was putting them on a stage instead of feeling like they should be tucked away, because that's where like shame lives, right? Where we hide things and we put them in the dark. And like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, because when I watched those kids in the musical, like, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, their energy was just like, I had the biggest smile. They were funny. And even the ones that had like the most severe situations, like, shined. And I just remember thinking like, wow, like, I'm like, God put me in this room on this day, like, to experience this. And it brought me so much joy. And I just loved that it was like celebrating who they were, instead of like feeling like it was something that you needed to look away from. Yeah. So that's just, I don't know, that I made that connection right now, and I wanted to share it, because hopefully things will change and we'll be able to like do more things like that, because I think that was like so impactful. And I love that you're finding a way around that, even, and using social media in that way. But
that brings me back to, so I said that she could still be in the Special Olympics. So the first time I was ever at a Special Olympic event was for her. And it was that same kind of feeling where I felt like a guest of honor in their presence. Like, I got to be a part of it. And it was, and literally every time, I mean, she's been doing Special Olympics now for, I think, 6 years. Every event we go to, I literally am in tears, and I am a mess of just like, I get to experience this. I get to be a part of it. And because like you said, I mean, I do think it's another level, like it's just a very spiritual level of like, an expression of who God is and his character and his nature. And when we don't get to experience that, like, people are missing out. And so like you said with Noel, I think that people, and obviously our demographic on TikTok is younger, but they've seen that her life isn't miserable. They've seen that like she has joy and she's doing big things. And speaking of that, so in the end of quarantine, she wanted to start making bracelets because her fine motor skill, like her motor skills are very limited, but she can start making bracelets. And I kept looking for a message of like, what message am I trying to teach? And I mean, the word inclusion has a lot of facets to it. And I didn't want to have to like, encompass all the facets. And so it was like, that wasn't the word. But as Noel started making these bracelets, I was like, well, what about be kind? And so it just started to be a thing. And she made these bracelets, and I just posted them on my Facebook, like, hey guys, Noel's making bracelets. And it literally exploded. And I'm like, holy cow. And so many people started, wanting to support her. And so we've kind of taken this idea and this vision and we're running with it. And so now our message that we teach, which is my 5th tip when I'm doing my presentation, but is to be kind. And I think that's just like such a universal lesson. And that's what, when you're trying to teach your kids about people with disabilities, the number one thing is to teach them to be kind. Treat them how they would want to be treated. Just, it's so simple and yet so hard. But be kind. And when you said a stage, like, when I first started this, I had this vision of, I was preparing a stage for Noel to come onto. And Noel has a paralyzed vocal cord, so her voice is really quiet. And here I was like, how cool is that I'm preparing a stage for a child whose voice isn't even being heard, but somehow on this stage, it's going to be heard in such a big way. And I feel like that's what we've been able to do in these things, is like, give her an opportunity and a platform to be able to speak and to spread her message. And it's just been, it's been, with God. Like, it's not me. I haven't built this. I haven't done it. It's like I told you, when I was sitting in that hospital room, and when he gave me that perspective shift of, not why me, but what's the purpose. It's like, thank you, God, that I got to be on this journey, and I got to be a part of this purpose that is far bigger than me, and that I get to experience this with Noel and help her in any way I can.
Wow. So I feel like we could just go on and on.
No.
And I don't even want to cut any of this off, but like, I guess there was so much in here already that, like, if there was one thing that you really want to highlight or like say again, that you want people to like just take with them and apply to their own challenges, to their own Noels, right? Their own situations where they feel like maybe they got the short end of the stick, but like, how can, like, how do you want to encourage people?
I really think, like, retelling this story to you guys, I just want to give you that hope, because there was so many times I was hopeless. I mean, with the van situation, I was hopeless. Like, I literally thought there was no way it was ever going to happen. We're never going to get a van. Things are never going to get better. But God, and that's the only way that we can even say anything of that situation. It was all God. It wasn't a person. It wasn't some eloquent prayer that I prayed. It wasn't because I was in a perfect season of life. Like, I was mad at God. Like, I was flat out mad. But God came into my hopeless situation and into this hopeless, place. And he came in and he did it. And so it's like, whatever situation you find yourself in right now, I mean, I just want you to know that God can still come into it, that God is still bigger, that there is hope even when we've lost it. And, and I think sometimes we think we have to work for hope. Like, we have to work so hard. I wasn't working to have hope. I literally wasn't doing anything. And so it's just like, just surrender and let God bring the hope to you. It's not something you can work for and work up and earn, or, like, if I do this and this, then I'll get that hope back. It's like, just surrender and let God come in and fill that hopeless situation.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love it. And we're all about hope here, obviously. So, and really at the core of foundation, I mean, God is our hope. That's what it comes down to. So how we I don't say take advantage like bad, but like utilize that, and that's a gift that we have, free gift that we have. So this was amazing, Tina. You did mention, obviously that you have your social media outlets. So can you just quickly tell folks where, if they would like to follow you and keep watching the story, where would they find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's at Disability Inclusion Educator. And then we have a YouTube channel that's Tina B. And you can also follow me on Facebook. It's Tina Beauvais, which my last name is a little tricky, but it's Tina Beauvais. And I would love, and if any of this sparked any questions, or if you yourself are a special needs mom and you just want somebody to be like, me too, I hear you, anything, I literally answer every message that I get on Instagram. So please DM me. I would love to continue a relationship with you. And I also love answering questions. So literally, if you have any questions whatsoever, definitely send them to me.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Tina. That was awesome and so encouraging. I mean, not just for people dealing with special needs, but like just in general, like with the challenges that we're facing with whatever it may be. And I know there's plenty right now to choose from with everything that's going on, but like your positivity is just amazing. And thank you for sharing your beautiful light with us on our podcast. And that's all we have for today. So come back next week to catch our next guest. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.